Friendly Q&A session with the Student Accessibility Services Office. We're really excited to have everyone here. I'm just going to lay some ground rules down. I just want to remind everyone that when you are speaking about your student, we ask that you do not use their first or last name. You're more than welcome to use their pronouns, but for confidentiality reasons, we ask that you don't refer to them by their first or last name. We also just want to remind you that you're more than welcome to turn your camera on and ask a question. Feel free to feel comfortable, but if that's not your prerogative, you're more than welcome to ask your question in the chat feature. My colleague Michelle will be looking at the chat feature and answering any any questions that come up. Sorry, I stuttered there, but we're really excited to have everyone here. I'm going to introduce myself, I'm going to introduce my colleague, and then she's going to introduce our two campus partners that are here. So thank you everyone for coming. My name is Megan. I'm one of the student orientation coordinators for the orientation office, and I'm going to hand it off to my colleague Michelle.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle. I'm another student orientation coordinator for the family program, just like Megan, and I'm gonna hand it off to Jenna.
Hello everyone, my name is Jenna Shales. I am the Associate Director for Student Accessibility Services, formerly known as the Disability Resources Office. So you may hear it referred to as the DRO, but we are working on changing our name to reflect kind of the more comprehensive work that we do. So Student Accessibility Services. And allow me to introduce Sarah Parker, who is our Assistive Technology Specialist.
Hi, I'm Sarah Parker. Just like Jenna said, I'm the Assistive Technology Specialist in the Disability Resources Office, and I can help your students with many different things.
So we're very, very lucky to have them here today. I'm going to start asking some questions, but again, please feel free to put any questions in the chat feature. We'll open it up to the audience very shortly, but just to kind of break the ice, I'm going to get started. So Jenna and Sarah, if a family member was looking to send their students documentation in, is that on a family member to send it in, or is that on the student? And where exactly do they send the documentation in?
Sure. So we generally prefer that the student sends it in directly to our office. Because we're working remote, the preferred methods are fax or email. So our email address is in the chat, and I can repost it again for those that have recently joined. It is disability_resources@bridgew.edu. And then our fax number is 508-531-4194. If neither of those options work for you, you can mail it in. We do have a member of our team going on campus a couple of times a week to check mail, but know that there will be a delay if you mail it in, just because of that gap in time there. So if a student is unable to directly submit it themselves, we will accept it from another person, but we will check with the student directly to make sure that they want it submitted and that they are seeking accommodations. And those communications will generally be conducted through the student's BSU email address. Did you want me to get into details about what kind of documentation is accepted, or yeah? All right.
Well, thank you.
Sure. So if you go on our website, which I will link you to in the chat, this is our external website, but there is a more detailed one that students can access with their BSU credentials on our intranet. The actual documentation guidelines are listed on there. We recognize that in the context of COVID-19 right now, it may be really hard to get certain specific documentation from medical providers, from school districts. We recognize that if your student was possibly due for like their 3-year evaluation this past academic year, they may not have documentation that is current if those tests did not occur. So have that student reach out to us, explain the situation, and we're being really flexible to make sure that everyone has the supports that they need to get up and running at BSU. We don't want anybody to be left out because of how crazy things are right now. But in general, documentation needs to be current, which we define as being within the last 3 years. And then it needs to be conducted by an appropriate practitioner. So probably not an ear, nose, and throat doctor diagnosing autism spectrum disorder, right? It needs to be, the diagnosis needs to be clearly defined and based on appropriate like DSM or ICD-10 or whatever criteria, based on whatever that diagnosis is that qualifies them. And the documentation needs to show that not only does a student have a diagnosis, but that diagnosis impacts them in one or more major life areas. So for most students seeking accommodations, that major life area is learning, right? So we do a lot of classroom accommodations, but we also do community and experiential accommodations. So feel free to engage with us, send us the documentation you have, and if it doesn't quite meet the marks, we'll work with you to figure out what else might be able to be obtained with relative ease that would be able to qualify the student for appropriate accommodations or any other services that we offer.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Jenna, I know you had mentioned that Sarah is your assistive technology specialist. Sarah, could you speak a little bit about what you do?
Of course. So I work directly with students with a wide array of assistive technology tools, low-tech options, all the way to some high-tech software or tools. And obviously that's shifted a little bit with the remote learning. So I'm one-on-one with many students this summer to try to find out what tools and supports and free software and Google extensions might really be best for their need. And we connect and talk about the tools that they're already using, the way that they take notes, the way that their class is being presented. And I really work one-on-one and try to come up with meaningful tools and supports that are going to help them. Some specific accommodations are access to recording your lecture, alternative formats of textbooks. Some students would prefer digital copies so that they can use that with the appropriate assistive technology tools. And I can help out with testing. So any student that has any questions and might want to bounce some ideas with me to find out the best tools out there, some that we can offer and some that I can point them in the right direction for, they can make an appointment to meet with me.
Thank you. That actually just led into my next question. So if someone's student was looking to set up an appointment with the SAS Center, how would they go about doing that?
So right now, because we're online, everything is online as far as scheduling times with us too. We have a bookings site that we will send students a link to, and then they can select from there what type of meeting they want to request, as well as who they would like to meet with and when they would like to meet. So the student is completely in control of selecting those things. So if a student is ready to meet with us, or they think they're ready to meet with us, or they just want to chat, they can email our disability_resources@bridgew.edu email. Let us know that they're looking to meet, and we'll send them that link directly so they can select all those options. And then the meetings are being hosted via Microsoft Teams, which with the BSU email account, you automatically get access to. It's part of your 365 package as a BSU student. And I know a lot of people are going to be using that in the fall. So get that set up and ready to go, and you should be ready to meet with us.
Thank you so much for those details. So where is the SAS Center located on campus? Say, like, if we were on campus in the fall, or if we aren't telecommuting, where would we be able to find you?
Absolutely. So we are located within the Academic Achievement Center, which is in the ground floor of the Maxwell Library. So the number of our space is 001, but it's better known to be the big area outside of the Starbucks.
And I'll just jump in that for the fall, we are going to be having remote appointments. So even though that's where we are, in the past, students would just be able to drop in and pop in and to be answer any questions. Students would need to have a set time to meet with us, and it would most likely be digitally.
Thank you so much for the clarification. I do see a question in the chat saying, should the student wait to schedule the meeting once they're done hearing about submitting documentation, or can they schedule a meeting before getting that documentation submitted?
So it really depends on what they want to meet about. If they are looking to set up specific accommodations, then yeah, we need to have their documentation in first. There's a pretty quick turnaround time if it's submitted digitally or via fax to us. We'll review that, and then we reach out to the student to let them know whether or not upon a preliminary review they appear to qualify for accommodations. And then if they do appear to qualify, we'll send them a link to set up a time to meet with us in that email that confirms that. If they don't appear to be eligible for accommodations, it's actually me generally that will follow up with that student via email and let them know that it didn't quite work. So let's chat to figure out what else they need. But if they just have like a question about stuff in general, they can meet with us.
Awesome, thank you. So I know some students out there have service animals or emotional support animals. Are they allowed on campus? And if they are, where does the documentation be sent in if they could have them on campus?
Sure. So Bridgewater State really welcomes service animals and emotional support animals. We recognize that they have huge therapeutic value for people. And so we want to make a person's experience with Sarah was going to jump in and save me on that one. You may have to anyway. Sorry. No. So we want to make sure that people's experience with their animal on campus is as positive as possible. With service animals, people who have a service animal are not required to register with our office or disclose that to us. We encourage them to, though, so that we can help them plan appropriately. So if you have a service animal with you, and you want to, let's say everything's like normal and we're all on campus, and you want to bring your service animal into another building on campus, and you don't want to deal with people kind of like questioning whether or not that animal should be there or whatever, or you want to make sure that it's the safest environment possible for your service animal. For example, like if there was like a lab in like our science building, it would be helpful for you to reach out to us in advance so that we can help pre-plan for that. Emotional support animals are different. So emotional support animals are generally prescribed as part of an overarching treatment plan for individuals with emotional support needs, right? So it's a very specific category. Those are all requested through our office. So we have a link, and maybe Sarah, you might be able to put it in the chat if you wouldn't mind, where you can apply or request approval for your for your emotional support animal through this link. There is some documentation that you need to submit to evidence that, and we kind of help plan out that process. We review the documentation, we meet with you to figure out how that's going to look, and we let you know if it's approved, and if it is approved, we work with you to implement that. That's more commonly people who are bringing emotional support animals into the residence halls, for example.
Thank you. That was really helpful. I'm just going to give it a minute to open up the conversation to any questions that our family members who are attending might have. Feel free to vocalize them or type it in the chat. So I'll just give everyone a minute to do that in case there's any questions.
So while we're waiting to see if there are questions, I want to throw it out there, if you don't mind, that a lot of students have concerns or have expressed concerns about being online or taking classes online in the fall. It is not everyone's cup of tea to take classes online. We recognize that, and it can be, for many students with disabilities, a huge benefit to be online. There's tons of research that shows that students on the autism spectrum do better in general when courses are online. People with social emotional anxiety disorders tend to do better with online classes, but really like that individual experience is an individual experience, right? So one of the things that we are doing to try to help support students that will inevitably have a harder time with online classes is we are working on creating a weekly session. We don't have a name for it yet. It's all very, very new. But basically what it's going to be is a group drop-in held remotely for students that are utilizing student accessibility services in conjunction with academic coaching to help keep students on track, to help them problem solve any issues that they're having as far as their online learning experience goes, to make sure that people are comfortable understanding their syllabus in the online format, check in on how they're doing taking notes if the class is synchronous versus asynchronous, getting to know lingo like that because it's stuff that you don't know unless you're used to online classes. So that's something that we'll be announcing details on a bit more. And then we also have our pre-college workshop coming up. That is going to be at the end of August. We've started advertising that a little bit on the BSU app. And that's a 2-day workshop. It's geared towards students, but there are breakout sessions on each of those 2 days for parents because the parent experience is really, really different when a student goes to college than it is in high school. So we want to help you prepare for that as well as a parent or a guardian or somebody that just has a lot of strong advocacy skills for that student. We want to help empower you to be involved appropriately, but also have comfort and confidence that your student is kind of self-directing and on the right track too.
Thank you. It didn't seem like we got any questions during that. So could you speak a little bit about if a student is coming from high school and they have a 504 and IEP, whether those carry over, what they need to do to have those accommodations because they already have a plan set inside in their high school. How do they have to go about that?
Sure. So there's a lot of confusion over whether or not these plans just kind of migrate over to college. The law that governs the creation of an IEP is not really applicable in the college environment. The law that governs the creation and implementation of 504 plans does apply in a college environment, but it doesn't mean that your already written 504 plan just transitions over to college, right? The expectations of a university are very different than the expectations of a high school. And part of what we want to help people achieve in the university setting is independence, right? So we really want people to be prepared for being successful in their careers after they get their degree from us, right? And that involves, I would say, a higher level of autonomy and self-direction and independence than what is generally incorporated into a high school 504 IEP. So you can certainly send those over to us as part of the documentation. It may or may not meet the requirements, but again, we're really working with people to work with what you have to qualify you. But the specific accommodations that were provided in a high school IEP or 504 plan do not necessarily carry over. They can help us inform what might work well for you and might be available for you in the college environment, but it's not a guarantee of those same things. Likewise, if you were a transfer student and you were transferring over from another college or university where you had accommodations, there's no guarantee that those specific accommodations would transfer with you either.
I'll just add on to that about what Jenna said at the end, that the IEP and the 504 and what's worked for you in the past in high school and colleges is definitely going to inform our conversation. It's an interactive process. So whenever we sit down with a student, we talk about what has helped you in the past, what accommodations did you have, and why did you feel that those helped you, and what else might be beneficial.
Thank you. So we did get a message in the chat asking if there's any resources or anything available if the situation is that both the student and the family member have a disability and they're trying to navigate this process of entering BSU. Are there any resources available specifically for that kind of situation?
Yeah, so I would say your best bet is really to just email us and get in touch with us, and we can walk you through stuff. We have a really amazing team. It's myself and Sarah. We have two accessibility specialists, Tabitha and Michael, who have been on our team for, I think, 2 years and 3 years respectively, right? And we've got Jen, who's our clerk. We have some really fantastic people who know the ins and outs. We have people who are parents of children with disabilities. We have people who worked in the field of disabilities for a really long time. So we will help you out.
Thank you so much. So this is a little different, but Megan, do you want to share any of the student perspective that you might have on the SAS Center?
Yeah, sure. So I am a student with a documented disability, and I started receiving services with the SAS Center when I came in as my first year. They've been really, really accommodating and really helpful, and I'm not just saying that because they're two of the campus partners are sitting here. I really do enjoy the services that they have, and I have a bad day, I can just come and sit with Sarah and she'll listen to me and we can kind of talk about it and like strategize what I can do. Some of the services that I receive, I get small room testing. So if we are in campus and classes are being held in person, I know this is a little different for the fall semester, but I would contact Sarah and I would submit a pink sheet form. And I know Sarah, if she can talk a little about that and if that's still applicable and a little bit, but I would submit one of those. And then I would come in the day of my test and I would have extended test taking time. And I would sit in a quiet room where it wouldn't be less distraction. So I wouldn't feel overwhelmed in a big classroom with other students taking tests. And I know that's really helped me. And I have used some of the assistive technology services that Sarah had talked about previously as well. So it's a really good office. I really do enjoy, and Jen always has a little piece of candy on her desk. So always can stop by and talk to Jen. So they're a really good office. Please stop by at any time and chat with them.
Thank you, Megan. There was a question that I did personally answer, but I think it does bring up a good point. So this family member asked if access to mental health counseling through the counseling center was only available if you register with the SAS Center. I did respond and say that counseling is available to all BSU students, but that does bring up the question of what kind of mental health benefits or ways can you help students with mental health, I don't want to say issues, mental health challenges, thank you. How can you help them through your office?
Yeah, so one of the things to know about our office is if you go back many years, the kind of like breakdown of students that utilized our services were definitely more folks with learning disabilities, right? And over time, we've seen a big shift, and it's the folks that have mental health needs that are utilizing our services more frequently. We still absolutely support people with learning disabilities and, you know, medical diagnoses and physical barriers, but mental health is very prevalent, both on our campus and in the community in general. And so we want to make sure that people are appropriately supported. How everyone experiences their mental health is really different. So it's challenging for me to say, oh, well, if you have, you know, mental health challenges, like here's what accommodations we have for you. That looks really different depending on who a person is, right? It runs the gamut though. Sometimes we will help students navigate an extension on an assignment because they were hospitalized or they weren't doing well. And they genuinely, based on their diagnosis and based on how that diagnosis impacts them, were not able to complete work by deadline, but really made a good, you know, effort forward. And that may be something that a student gets, although that's rare. Other times we can work with students to give them, you know, a little advanced registration status so that if they have outstanding mental health appointments with their practitioner, let's say that they live on campus, but they are commuting home to see a therapist that they have been seeing for a really long time, and that's a set appointment. We might work with them to make sure that their schedule is built around those appointments because they're really significant. We have worked closely with students who have taken a chunk of time off to go for an inpatient program if they needed to, and we've worked with them to make sure that their academic experience is not negatively impacted by that. It's so incredibly customized. Again, it's really hard to say. On kind of like the lighter, more common end, I guess. Like Megan was mentioning before, we have a lot of students who utilize our reduced distraction testing area for reasons of all types, right? But sometimes using the reduced distraction testing area is appropriate for somebody who has anxiety, right? So there's a million reasons for all of these different things to happen. But we're happy to work with them. And I think most of us on the team have some type of degree and definitely training in mental health. I think almost all of us do, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. So it's something that we're all familiar with and very aware of.
Also, I'll just say we collaborate a lot with different campus partners, so we're very connected and collaborate with the counseling center, and we run programs with them sometimes. We also are able to walk students over and kind of get them connected there. We also, within the Academic Achievement Center, have different resources like academic coaching, which can help students kind of get prepared for their tests and kind of work through different things. So we definitely are able to help students and give them accommodations, but we're also able to refer them to other resources that they can benefit from.
Thank you. That actually does kind of speak to my experience. I'm also someone with actually 2 documented disabilities at your center. One of them is OCD. So through my OCD, and which is a mental health challenge for me, I was able to negotiate getting a single in one of the residence halls because of my OCD, and I did that through your office. So that's a good example of how it is really individualized to each person.
Just a quick note about that. So we do, like I said before, we do academic and classroom accommodations and more experiential accommodations, community accommodations. We do have a different process if you were looking for accommodations related to housing, meal plans, and parking. So that can be found on our website as well, or you can email us and we can give you more information about that. So there are a couple of things where it's not just like send us your docs and we'll get back to you. It's a little more formalized. But again, if you just email us, we can get you on the right track with all of that.
Thank you. So I do see a question in the chat, and I was wondering if you could touch upon it again. Parent was asking, how recent is a doctor's report? Their son is on the spectrum, but is not tested annually. Is it just something he has to live with? Because he does get accommodations at the school. Can you touch upon that a little bit?
Sure. So we recognize that many diagnoses are not things that are going to change and be re-diagnosed every 3 years. So our general expectation is that the documentation is within 3 years. So if in this case your son has an existing diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, if there's nothing within the last 3 years that says that diagnosis and can describe the impact, we would probably refer you to check with either if they're seeing like a psych provider or a primary care practitioner who would be able to provide you some documentation to evidence that diagnosis. But if he is currently in school and he currently has an IEP and that diagnosis is confirmed in there and really meets the rest of our documentation criteria as far as describing the impact on that major life area and some of the strategies that have worked, we would probably accept that as well.
Thank you. So this is a quick question. How is our campus when it comes to like ADA compliant or, people who have physical disabilities, are all of the residence halls open and available to them? If there was an issue, would they be able to get help? How does that kind of work on our campus?
Sarah, do you want to take that or me? Either of us.
You could take this one.
Oh, thanks. So, Bridgewater State University is a classic, beautiful brick and mortar New England school, and it goes back a long time, and it predates a lot of the ADA requirements that we have now. So what that means is if you utilize a wheelchair, for example, you are not going to be able to access every single building with ease, unfortunately. It's something that the school is aware of, and the school has continued to make progress in modifying buildings, modifying entryways, but unfortunately, there's no magic wand that can make it all happen at once. So what we do is we make sure that you can access everything that you are required to access, and we work to make sure that you can access everything that you want to access. So let's say that you have a class that's scheduled in a building that you cannot physically access, right? We will make sure that that class gets moved to a building that you can access, okay? If you have classes that are spread apart on campus and you have 15 minutes between class to get to them, we may work with the registrar's office to reschedule where those classes are located to make sure that you get your classes physically close together so that you're not late to classes. We may also work with some of the transportation resources on campus to get you transportation from point A to point B if that's more appropriate, right? We can make sure that if you're living on campus, you're in a fully accessible residence hall. So we have opportunities like that. As far as specific classroom stuff goes, and this is why I kind of looked at Sarah, we have, so every student that comes to BSU is required to take a lab at some point, right? So lab tables are not necessarily wheelchair accessible. And I keep focusing on wheelchairs, but there are plenty of other examples of accessibility barriers on campus too. So we'll make sure that a wheelchair accessible table is available for you in your lab. If you need specific equipment so that you can complete your lab work, we'll make sure, Sarah generally is the person who makes sure that that is obtained for you and it's available in your classroom. So there are definitely barriers. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. You need to let us know if you face any of those barriers. If you let us know what your needs are in advance, we will kind of run our brains around it to see if we can come up with any barriers that we could expect you to run into, and we'll mitigate those in advance. But it can be an ongoing process.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that of what Jenna was saying. If there's any concerns ahead of time or after the fact, please let us know, because we want to hear about it, and so that we can help, and we can not only for your student but for other students that might run into similar situations. So we try to be proactive and try to make sure everything's accessible. But if there's anything additional we can do, we're definitely here to help with that.
Also, just one more quick note on that. We do have a couple of committees. The Student Government Association does a safety walk around campus regularly, and then we do have a vice president level group that functions on campus that looks at accessibility challenges, among other things. So we know that there's work to be done, and it is an ongoing dialogue. So like Sarah said, your ongoing feedback is absolutely always welcome in this area.
Awesome, thank you. So I've heard through the grapevine that there is a peer mentor program that a student accessibility service office holds. Can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
I can talk about it for a little
There
bit
you
if
go.
you want. So we have an amazing peer mentor program that we've gotten such great feedback from. So incoming freshmen can get matched with an upperclassman at Bridgewater who has utilized our services and has navigated the campus as a student with disability. And they can kind of give them that peer support where they can sit down with them weekly and go through their syllabus, answer any questions about things on campus. They might say if they have certain interests and they want to get connected, they can refer them to different clubs or different groups on campus. And it just sometimes it's easier and better to ask a student close to your age that of what I have a question. And it's one thing to hear it from us, but it's one thing to hear it from a student who said, I just went through that last year, I had the same problem with a professor. So this is what I did and it worked well. So it can be a really, really good support on campus. So if your student is interested in that, they can talk to us when they meet with us for their accommodation letter, and we will match a student up again with what we think is going to work best with them. Sometimes we match students up who are in the same major and might have taken the same kind of classes so that they can refer them to different tutoring things. But sometimes it's just who we think might have some good chemistry. So yeah, we are able to talk to your students more about that.
I would also encourage your students to keep their eyes peeled for communications, targeted communications about this program. So full disclosure, we're waiting to hear back about how many peer mentors we will be able to hire for the fall. Generally, we try to have around 7 peer mentors, and then our peer mentors typically take like 2, sometimes 3 students on as their mentees. So our maximum number will be very much dependent upon how many peer mentors we're allowed to hire. We also do have a huge demand for non-freshmen, so people that have transferred over or people that have been at BSU for a year but didn't quite like maximize their experience and they really want some additional like guidance and just companionship. We are prioritizing first-time freshmen for the spots that we will have, but we will open it up if there are additional spots available to those other kind of categories of students. So make sure that they jump on it when they see the email about it, so that if it's something they're interested in, they get assigned a mentor.
Thank you. So what is the SES Center doing in regards of the pandemic? So if some students do have classes on campus, is the office going to be open? Is majority of the individuals working there, is it going to be telecommuting? Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So it's really tough. We are part of the Academic Achievement Center, as I mentioned before, and as a whole, the Academic Achievement Center is going to be conducting all of our services online. So we will have some folks going into the office periodically, as I mentioned earlier, but that is more for maintaining records, making sure that we're receiving documentation that's sent in via mail, handling some of those on-site responsibilities. That's primarily what's going to be happening. So if you're meeting with a member of our team, it's going to be pre-scheduled and it's going to be conducted via Microsoft Teams remotely. Depending on guidance from the state and kind of like what happens with coronavirus as we head into the fall, we may or may not be offering some proctoring of examinations on campus. So as you mentioned before, Megan, we have the reduced distraction testing area, also known as our accessible lab, which has some additional adaptive tech in it, adaptive lab that has some tech in it that helps students appropriately test based on their needs. We don't want to limit access to that, or we don't want to like end access to that, but we will have to be realistic about what that looks like. So based on current social distancing and dedensification guidelines, we could actually only fit 1 person in that lab to test at a time. And even that is a little dicey because of some air circulation concerns and stuff. And we just want to make sure that people stay well. So again, based on guidance, anything can change. What we're thinking right now is we might proctor in a different space on campus that would allow more people to come in on a very limited schedule. for in-person classes only. But again, there's a big asterisk next to that saying subject to change.
And I'm going to be around to help students that are taking their tests online. Like Jenna was saying, some students are concerned about that. So any student that receives test taking accommodations then is able to meet with me and kind of talk about how to create your own reduced distraction environment, and make sure that you're able to communicate with your professor to make sure you're getting that extra time. So it may not be as hands-on in the past, but we're here to support students to grant those accommodations for test taking.
Yeah, and please know that if your student is granted the accommodation of time and a half, for example, that's a pretty common accommodation. That is applicable online or in person, right? So if they are taking an online class and the exam is being administered online and every other student gets an hour, your student still gets an hour and a half to take it. It's just going to be taken online instead of in person. And that can be a big shift, but like Sarah said, we're working individually with students to make sure that they're set up to be as successful as possible in that environment.
And speaking from my experience in the spring, you guys are doing a great job. I have chronic migraine, so switching to online learning was definitely really hard for me because it was a lot more screen time than I was used to, and it did really spike my symptoms. And I got in touch with you guys. I actually got in touch with Sarah. I got so many resources and so much help, so that was really helpful. So if there are any students or any family members worried about online learning for any reason that has to do with anything like this, don't worry, they're so helpful. I'm not, like Megan said, I'm not even just saying that. Like from my experience, it was really very easy and very helpful.
Well, I'm going to open it up again to the audience and into the chat feature to see if anyone has any questions again. Please feel free to turn your mics and cameras on if you have a question. If not, please just chat it and I will more than welcome to moderate the question. I know, Jenna, you had mentioned while we wait for some questions that you're waiting to hear back on how many student employees that you have. But if this was a regular based semester, does the Student Accessibility Service Office offer student employees like work study programs for family members that are looking for their student to get a job on campus?
Yeah, so we actually are super lucky to have 3 graduate assistant positions. So a graduate assistant is for grad students. They basically don't have to pay tuition and they get a paycheck for working with us 20 hours a week, which is amazing. So you will inevitably meet our graduate assistants in the coming academic year. And then we do hire student employees within the office as well under normal circumstances. So the student employees do, a little bit of everything. When we're on campus, they run stuff around campus for us. They make sure that resources have made it from point A to point B. They greet students. They, book appointments. They answer kind of, I would say, like entry-level questions. They don't like interpret documentation or anything, but they can talk about their own experience. They can, give some good resources both within our office, like student accessibility services, and elsewhere on campus. So we do hire generally work study students for those spots. You looking for work? Is that what I'm hearing? No.
Thank you. So just to be conscious of time, this is a question that we do like to ask all our campus partners. So what is the best piece of advice that you could give to new families coming into Bridgewater regarding their students and regarding getting documentation and that support that they need to kind of let them have coming in? So can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Man, that is a tough one. There's so much advice I could give. I think it's really important before your student comes to BSU to have a good, solid, mutual understanding with them about what each of your roles will be once that student is up and running at BSU. Like I said before, in high school and basically from birth onward, right? You as a parent have been that student's number one fighting force, right? You have been their strongest advocate, you've been their strongest supporter, you've been the person who has made sure that the IEPs and 504s are followed up on, that the meetings happen, that the right people are at the table, that the right services are obtained. You have led that. And because of the work that you've put in, they're where they're at now, right? And it kind of comes to a screeching halt when they start college. And I don't say that to scare you. I say that to let you know that even though that kind of train, if you will, has halted, your student is hopping on the next train, which is heading to the rest of their life. And you can certainly come with them, but you are not the driver of that train. They are. So knowing ahead of time what each of you foresees that relationship looking like. Do they want to fill out a FERPA authorization to allow you to have access to speak to people? Or would they rather relay information to you? Or would they rather just take it on themselves, you know? Getting a good understanding and kind of following up on that and keeping that in your mind as you help them still as a parent in their first, you know, navigating college steps is really just incredibly important, I would say. Sarah, you got anything else?
Yeah, so I'll just say kind of what Jenna was saying before too, about that we are here to help your students be independent and be successful in the future. So lots of times, like, students will come to me and they'll say, I need this software, this is this app, I used this all through high school and middle school, this is what I know. And sometimes we might accommodate that, but sometimes we might push back a little and say, well, actually this app or this software might be more beneficial in the workforce. And so again, our goal is to help students be independent and successful going forward. And also, again, something Jenna said too is have no fear. Like, we are here to support your students remotely, even though our office may be closed and we are providing services a little bit differently. Our office is here to support them. So any questions from you or your student, just encourage them to just send us an email and bounce some ideas off us, and we're here to help your student.
One question that just came to mind for myself, Jenna, you had talked about FERPA a little bit. Can you touch upon that and the students now that they're coming to college? Are parents allowed to call and ask how they're doing in classes around just like their documented disability? Can you talk a little about that?
So it's tough. FERPA is kind of like, so a lot of people are familiar with HIPAA, right? HIPAA is what protects medical information, right? Like personal health information. So FERPA is kind of the college equivalent of HIPAA. Your student has to physically complete a FERPA authorization or FERPA release form to even allow us to consider speaking with you about their records, their experience, anything that has to do with their experience at Bridgewater State University. So again, that's why I say figure that out ahead of time if you can, so that you're both on the same page about what that would look like. It's important to know, though, that even if your student has completed a FERPA release or given permission for the school to engage with you about certain topics, which can be specified or it can be very general, it doesn't mean that we're obligated to. So a lot of times the approach of our office is to really try to prioritize engaging with the student, right? So we may have a FERPA release on file, but we may try to, you know, empower the student to dialogue with you about what questions you might have. You know, there are certainly times where we do speak with the family members, but generally we do that with the student present. As well, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page and we are promoting their independence and that long-term success and growth strategy we mentioned before. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you. So again, to be conscious of time, I just really want to open up the chat one more time to our family members to ask any questions. If we don't have any questions, you're more than welcome to go. But I'm going to ask if Sarah or Jenna could again just pop the disability resource email again in the chat feature. And then if you don't mind verbalizing it, that'd be really helpful for our family members as well.
Sure. So I just put the link in the chat. If you are by phone connected and you can't see that, your best bet is to just Google Bridgewater State University disability, and that's the easy way to get there. And then as far as the phone number and fax and everything, I'm about to paste that in again. So our phone number is a main line that is going directly to voicemail because we are not on campus, but know that we are constantly checking the voicemails and calling people back. So if you need to call, the phone number for that is 508-531-2194. The fax number is very similar. Fax number is 508-531-4194, right? And our email is disability_resources@bridgew.edu.
Thank you. So I just want to remind family members that we do have one last Q&A session tomorrow, and that is directed for our first generation family members. So you're more than welcome to come. We really appreciate family members coming out to this session. You're more than welcome. I know Jenna and Sarah from personal experience are always checking their emails and always around to answer questions, so please reach out to them. But thank you for coming. Myself, Michelle, Jenna, and Sarah will stay on for a couple extra minutes if you have a private message that you want to ask us. But if not, you're more than welcome to leave, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming.